Thanks so much for joining us. I just want to welcome everybody. It is a deep honor for me to welcome three of my former students here with me. And I just wanted to start by saying, not that long ago, these three were like you. They were in school, and they were worried about finding a job after graduation. And let's just establish that while they were here, they heard about media layoffs. And let's also establish that they are all three working professionals working in audio now, and very successful. So what's their secret? My goal here tonight is to spill every bean. And let me welcome to the stage Michelle Navarro and Mycah Hazel and Sarah Baik. So Mycah Hazel, hi, is an audio journalist and writer born and based in New York City. She produces stories for the Radio Diaries podcast and NPR's All Things Considered. She writes print articles on NPR.org. She's also produced stories for WNYC's All of It with Allison Stewart, WHYY's The Pulse, and the New York Institute for the Humanities, and has written stories on pop culture, history, and style for The Cut, Fox, Nylon, and others. Mycah, you have a big series coming out tomorrow.
Yeah, I have a story, part of our series. Our show, Radio Diaries, is doing a series called The Unmarked Graveyard, stories from Hard Island. If you don't know, Hard Island is this huge cemetery off the coast of the Bronx where people get buried if their body went unclaimed or if they didn't have any family members to really sort out that process. So we did a series of stories finding these families and talking to them about the process of finding their loved ones. Some happy, some sad. Mine, I would say, is a pretty fun one. It's about a writer who kind of never got her due back in the 60s and ended up there, kind of following her life in Greenwich Village. And I like to do stories like that. They're just mostly history stories of people who are kind of unknown and forgotten.
And Mycah was in the Lit Rep program. She is class of 2020. Michelle Navarro, you are class of 2021 from CRC. That's the Cultural Reporting and Criticism program.
Yes.
And you're an audio journalist, born and based in New York City, although you're about to move to Chicago.
Yes, going back home.
And you've been working at Serial Productions and with the New York Times, and you've been working for This American Life, and you're about to start a new job at CityCast Chicago.
Yes, I have 2 weeks on the job, so that's been really fun.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, and Sarah Baik, you are class of 2023, the most recent grad, and you were in the Lit Rep program, and you're a writer and audio producer from Vancouver, Canada. You've been working at New York Public Radio. You've been producing, you have helped produce episodes of 99% Invisible, What Roman Mars Can Learn About Conraw, and WQXR podcasts. And you've also produced a food and diaspora story that you did for your thesis, ran on an episode of America's Test Kitchen, the Proof podcast.
Hi.
Okay, welcome.
Thanks.
So what I want to start with is really the path from graduation to your first job. So since yours was the most recent, can we start with you?
Yeah, definitely. It's been, I was here for my graduation stuff in May, and this is my first time being back, so it's really cool to be here. I got a podcast internship out of WQXR over the summer, and then...
How did that come together?
I think how'd that come together? I saw, they were posting summer internships, and I think... So I'm with WQXR, which is a classical music station, and I'm not really a musician, but I grew up in a very musical household. My mom is a choir conductor at a church and a piano teacher, so that's always been part of my upbringing. And it kind of, when I saw the job sort of post, that felt like a cool way to incorporate sort of a part of my upbringing that I don't do a lot about. So I put a lot sort of into kind of crafting my application and whatnot for that. And yeah, it ended up being a good fit. So that's how I started at QXR, and then somebody on the team was leaving, so I took over a different role that's more sort of on the digital web content side of things right now. So I get to work with on-air programming folks, which has been really cool.
And was that like a job posting that was public, or was that a temp job that was internal that you only knew about because you were there at QXR?
Very much the latter. Yeah, somebody was leaving, and then that was sort of at the very end of my internship as well. So it just kind of ended up being good timing, right place at the right time kind of thing.
Yeah, but also there was probably you being an intern there that they knew and could trust, and you've done a great job, was really a lot of that foot in the door.
Yeah, I think that it's been a good team for me, and I've like really enjoyed working with the folks there. And then I think they like thought of me since I was there, and then we've gotten to work together over the summer. Yeah.
Michelle, so what was your path from graduation to employment?
So I graduated in December 2021, and I was just kind of like looking around the web, trying to figure out what I was gonna do with my life. And I think I was on Twitter one day, and I think someone had retweeted about the deadline for the This American Life Fellowship. And right away I thought like this would be such a great way to keep working in audio. And yeah, so I applied, and I had caught the application really last minute. Like I needed like, it was like due in 2 days. But luckily my professors pulled through with recommendations and like references, and I was able to get it in. And yeah, I graduated December 21, and I think I started at This American Life about 2 weeks after. And the fellowship is 6 months. Great fellowship. They kind of just throw you in the mix of everything, and you learn all the different parts of putting the show together. And I think once my fellowship was coming to an end, they also had a random opening to continue freelancing there as an associate producer. And so I stuck around as much as I could. And then after that, I was able to kind of go over to Serial because I had heard that they were looking for a producer there too. And so, yeah, it was a really, the fellowship really opened that door for me and able to, keep focusing on those skills.
Do you have a sense of what it was in your background, in your application, that got you the fellowship, got you that initial chance and foot in the door with This American Life?
I think something, and I feel like, I think something that you told us in intermediate audio, was like when you're putting together samples of your work to just make sure that you could show the people that are looking at your application the different kinds of work. And so when I was putting together my application, I was really trying to talk about like my tastes and things. I think like something that you also mentioned to us was like people are looking for distinct taste. Like what can you bring that's gonna be different on the team? And when I was at This American Life, it was really clear that although everyone was just great at their job, I feel like every time there was a specific story, we would go to different people because it's in their taste or they have experience writing about that, reporting on that. And so I think when I was putting together my application, I tried my best to, just kind of take different samples of my work, some more feature, some more like creative nonfiction, some that are kind of more reported and newsy and to the point. And I really tried to, the pieces that I tried to put together, I was just trying to speak to the things that I like to report, kind of give them an idea of what I'm interested in and the way I like to write and produce things. And so I think that's something that, when I got the fellowship, they were able to speak to that my taste or the idea of what I like to produce was very clear in the application.
So it's interesting because you guys have almost an opposite success story. Like you tailored yourself to the fellowship, like kind of bent backwards to fit the opening in a way, like highlighting something about your background. It isn't necessarily what you would have put forward otherwise, but knowing who they are, you were like, okay, here's my musical side. And maybe for 99% Invisible or somewhere else, you wouldn't have even mentioned that aspect, right? And for you, it was really like, okay, who am I and how can I show them who I am? Is that right?
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. Mycah, You want to talk a little bit about your path from graduation to your entry into the working world?
Sure, yeah. So I graduated in 2020, like during the pandemic, of course. And at the time, like throughout January to May, I had been interning at WNYC, which at all of it with Allison Stewart, which is like an arts and culture show. That definitely came about from just, I had known the WNYC and I've been just looking at openings, and in classes I was already making audio stories, so kind of similar to what you mentioned about just packaging what you do in order to send it to people. I kind of just did that because I didn't have anything really published anywhere official at the time. So I had been interning there from January until May, and it got extended to August. But then obviously during the pandemic, there was not a lot of breath for work, and I was out of a job from September through the fall. But during that time, I think something that I definitely learned while I was here was, to kind of freelance and hustle a bit, and I moved back home, and I had been doing kind of short audio stories for just different call-outs that I saw similarly on Twitter. There was a show called The Pulse, which is still around, that puts out calls a lot for like really short, 4 to 5 minute, easy reported stories that I would do in the meantime. And I would be doing also just written things, also from scavenging Twitter for pitch call-outs and those sorts of things. But the way Radio Diaries kind of came about, that was kind of all to keep myself busy and obviously to keep building a workload even while you're out of a job. But the way Radio Diaries came about was that while I was in school, I had applied to their fellowship, I think like my very first year here, probably like barely into the time here, probably 2 months in. I was kind of a new student, I hardly had any clips yet, I kind of just took a chance and applied, did not get it. But I had just kind of kept in touch with the person, the manager, Nellie, to just see what opportunities were coming out. It's very easy to send someone an email periodically to ask if there's, whether it's pitching, whether it's if there's any opening coming out or things like that. And so by the time October of 2020 came around, I had actually seen the job from her emailing me, being like, hey, you kind of bugged me before. We have this opening for a fellowship, like a 8-month or a year-long fellowship there. You should apply if you want. So I had applied, and the application process was kind of unique. It was actually them sending you an interview they done with somebody, and you kind of were going to cut your own short story, probably like a minute long. But you were just going to cut what take you found most interested and try and make a story out of it. And I believe they did pay for me to do that. But yeah, it was kind of an opposite process of these, as I feel like I did send my resume, and for that I did kind of put forth things that I was interested in. I think I definitely agree with your point, Michelle, on just kind of highlighting what makes you unique and what are your interests. I think I definitely highlighted the fact that I'm really interested in arts and culture, history, and things like that. But I think more importantly, something that I highlighted that I got from NYU was just more skill at the most basic level. I think they really wanted me to show if I can edit and if I can make a good story. So yeah, I worked on that for a year, and then luckily got extended to assistant producer, where I am now.
So let's talk a little bit about that. You said that NYU had prepared you to edit. You learned some hard skills. Can we talk a little bit about what you learned at NYU and how it prepared you for your jobs?
I think as a lot of people know with applying to school, I feel like with your application, you're very focused on kind of highlighting yourself as an individual, what you're interested in, where you want to be in life, and those sorts of things. And I think when I got here, something that was really important to do was also to just kind of capitalize on the chance to learn new skills. I can come here mostly writing a lot, but open to different journalism fields. And at the time, people were really pushing audio and pushing podcasting, and I think something that the school really taught me was to not stay in the box that I came in here with. I think I came here just to do long form, and that was it, and that was my dream and that sort of thing. Whereas I feel like you realize going out into the journalism world, there are a lot of different opportunities, and your doors get kind of shut if you don't like have the skills to do them. So yeah, I feel like the big thing I learned was to kind of broaden my skill set, and that's either by taking an elective. To be more drastic like me, I kind of completely detoured my like thesis to audio and just went full in. But yeah, I think that would be the biggest thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was also in the same program as Mycah, just not at the same time. I came in with no audio experience, but I was already a big like podcast listener, and I really wanted to learn to make audio. And then I was so hoping that I would like making audio as much as I hoped that I would, and clearly I did. So I ended up really tailoring my degree to like I take every audio class there was that was available to me. I did a thesis also in audio. And it was just really nice to be able to have that space to kind of make stories that I was interested in making. And I realized that, like, you don't always as easily get to do that in other, in a workplace setting or whatever it is. So, like, I think it was really good that I had this space to sort of work on stories that I, like, was compelled to work on.
Yeah, I think similarly, just having the space to experiment on ideas, have the time, and then also have professors who are skilled in this. And then I know we would always have your past students or people that you know to edit our stuff. And I remember having a lot of conversations with those editors that I think really helped kind of tailor the projects, like keeping what my ideas and what I wanted to do, but hearing like people's thoughts on your work was really helpful. Just being in the classroom setting of like discussing, like when we would listen to different podcasts or different stories and just talking about what works, what doesn't. That was really helpful for me to see how I can apply what I enjoyed or what I didn't enjoy about other people's work and, implement that in my own. I think another thing too is like just being really intentional was being an intentional editor, which I think is hard because when you write a story or when you're putting a piece together, you're like so connected to it and you don't want to cut anything. It gets so hard to cut things out, especially if you interview the person and you know their story. And I think something that I really learned here was just like, take it out. Like if it's not super important or if it's not intentional, if it doesn't add, like take it out. Or like even like the music, is it just there just for the vibe, or is it there because it's coming in to emphasize a moment or a transition, and it's coming out to move to a next place. So I think learning about how intentional you can be about your stories was something that was really helpful, and I definitely carried that with me at every like audio place that I've been at. So I think that was really helpful.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about what you've learned since you've left NYU and what you've been working in your workplace, the things that you're learning there. Like, what have you learned about working in audio, Mycah?
You just
Any thoughts?
Well, I think my biggest thought, well, it's kind of related, but something I would go back and do now if I were here is I definitely think I learned a lot of, it's very helpful to be someone who graduates knowing audio software, obviously, and who's not like totally, learning on the job. That's definitely one of the biggest things. And I think if I could go back, I would really delve more into that process. I think since working in audio, I've realized just how much more there really is to learn about that and how valuable it is to really to know how to use like a design software and to know how to use it well. I think while I was here, I was very, very, very concerned about like my ideas and my story ideas and me, which I think is good for pitching and that sort of thing. But at the same time, I think in order to open up your opportunities to other jobs, you also just really want to be good at the boring stuff, which is just like, if somebody tells you about learning to use XY software or something like that, or they have a discount or something like that, and you kind of shrug it off. Maybe try learning it, because that's kind of what sets you apart from the next person, is just being really good at editing and being really good at the technical boring stuff.
Yeah, I was really bad at Pro Tools. I don't know, I was at NYU. I was coming from like a different software, and And I feel like that's something that I definitely, but I was introduced to it in your class. Like that's what we started to use. And I feel like that was my easy way to actually get better at it and just feel stronger and more confident in using software. So that's definitely something that I kind of, I walked out feeling a little confident, but I think definitely just like, it's like a practice and being able to continuously use it. I feel so much better in knowing how it works.
I agree. And also, I think, like, and this is just like, it makes sense and it's intuitive a little bit, but the more you're in, these edits, the more you work with, an editor or your professor or your peers, I think the better you get at it. So just kind of going through that process over and over again with your own work and other folks' work, I think that's something that, we were doing in class. And then when I was, doing internships and in jobs, that felt like, oh, like I can kind of do this and contribute and provide and receive feedback. So that is something that I kind of carry with me.
Let's go along those lines, though, of regrets. I think, Mycah, you introduced that idea of, like, if you could do it all over again, what would you take advantage of here and your time here? And, maybe what should you not be so worried about? Do you have any thoughts, Michelle or Sarah?
I guess I was so concerned that I wouldn't get a job.
Yeah.
I spend so much time, I think, so much of my free space in my brain just like worried about that, when I feel like I didn't need to, there was no point in worrying yet. And I think that's definitely one thing, because it all worked out. But also I think there is sometimes where I would stop myself from pitching something or wanting to work on something because I thought it was too like weird, or I don't know, like not I don't even know if weird really, but just something that I think no one else was going to be interested in. Like I was like, oh, people are going to think this is boring, so I would just like kill the idea. And even though there was times where I was able to kind of take that leap and be like, you know what, I'm just going to do it, there was definitely times where I kind of stopped myself, and I kind of wished that I was able to explore and experience more in those ideas.
Yeah, I'm nodding absolutely, because the only feeling that's worse than like thinking you're not good enough to pitch is when you had an idea of something to pitch, you didn't pitch it, and you see it get turned into something, and that has absolutely happened to me before, and it sucks. And I would not wish that on anybody. So, like, I think half of the issue with pitching is that people don't think their ideas are good enough, but also I think people sometimes think that they don't know how to write one, and you probably all do. You know how to write a pitch. Like, even if you think you don't, you do, and even if you claim you don't, your professor does. It's a great way to get your stuff out the door, but also, even if it's not already published, send it to people as if it is. Like, I put my stuff on SoundCloud, and that's what I sent to Radio Diaries, and they didn't hear. So, yeah, I would definitely pitch your stuff, or at least just put it somewhere, for sure. I think I would definitely be less hard on myself about that, looking back on things.
Totally agree. I think the other thing that I'll add is I think the audio industry is quite well connected. And thinking back to my time at NYU, like the professors here and like even my colleagues here, like everyone's like connected to somebody else. And I think like they do end up being your peers and colleagues and people that hire you and people who, go get drinks with or coffee with to talk and rant about work. So I think just kind of keeping in touch with people that you come across and connect with, I think is something that's, it's always a good idea, but I think it's especially a good idea in this industry.
Let's talk about layoffs. Have you been affected by layoffs? Have you been impacted by layoffs in the field? Do you feel like your job is stable? And what do you think you can do to shore up your own security? And what can we do to shore up our own security in unstable times?
Great question.
Yeah, so Sarah, you in particular, you are at a place that has done
Yes.
kind of major layoffs recently.
Yeah, I'm with New York Public Radio, and as I'm sure a lot of you know, it's gone through a big layoff like very recently, as of like a few weeks ago. So that was pretty hard. And just kind of seeing very talented folks whose work I've admired well before I got here be impacted was just really hard, and in a bit of an existential way as well. I don't know if I have a good answer for the latter, but I think just kind of I think there's like work, but there's also like, like always just kind of keeping that creative channel open within me is hard, especially when there's all these like sad and big things happening, but I think that's something I try to keep in mind.
Yeah, I feel like similarly, like seeing people you admire, people that you would listen to their work get laid off. It checks you. It kind of like reminds you of like, oh, testing. It scares you, but it reminds you that like, anyone can go at any time, and it doesn't matter, if you've been in the business forever or if you just started. It could be anyone, and yeah, it's definitely, it could be a scary feeling. But I think it's just kind of like a reminder of like there's always things out there if you look for them. And I don't know, I guess coming from like how I said earlier, like when I was in school, before I even was able to apply for a job, I was so worried about it. And I think at a certain point, especially now that we are constantly hearing about layoffs, if there's nothing you can do about it, and it's really sad, but it's kind of like I try to push it in the back of my head and hope I don't get that email ever or anytime soon. In terms of like question of like stable, because of that, even though right now I have a full-time job, this is technically my first full-time job, because before I was freelancing, I was on contract. So it's like I wasn't laid off, but I always had that end date that was in my brain. So I was always constantly thinking about what am I going to do next. And so now that I do feel a little bit more stable, because there's not an end date until I get fired or laid off, which hopefully doesn't happen. But I think it's just always a thing in the back of your head where like it could happen, even to me that I have a full-time job. And so yeah, I don't think I have a good answer either. It happens.
Yeah, I kind of have a similar reaction. Obviously graduating during the pandemic where there was just literally zero hope. I think I had to kind of check myself and be like, listen, if you're this far in the game where you're...
So hang on, Mycah, because I remember talking to you at a time when you were like, should I take this job or this job? So hearing you describe it as zero hope, like there was a period where you didn't have work, but then in fact, you were quite sought after.
Well, yeah, I was getting there. I'm talking like, okay, let's do the timeline. March 2020, I'm kind of an intern, but things are falling to shit. Like, I don't know if I'm ever gonna get a job. I think I had to check myself and be like, listen, if you've gone this far where you were in a school to do this, even if it's undergrad or grad school, whichever way, like, you're dedicated to this. Like, what is your other path? Are you just gonna quit and, become something else? If you've gotten this far, it's clearly because you wanna do it. You have to spend less time worrying about it and more time just pursuing whatever you can. And so, yeah, I was out of a job for 4 months, but during that time, I was just continue to apply to things. And I think that's just kind of the mentality you have to have. Whether it's like, I lived at home, just to do it. So like, yeah, it's just really just about sacrificing and checking yourself a little bit. But chances are, if you're in a position here where you're in classes to do this, you want to do it. So worry less about layoffs and just keep pushing to apply.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about approaching your job search and advice for approaching job searching at this moment in time. For folks in this environment, when they graduate, what's like step one? Where would you begin step one?
I think definitely, I don't know if one of you mentioned, but like looking at Twitter or like X, I guess now, but Twitter.
LinkedIn.
Like just different websites, yeah, where people who you follow, like they are so good at plugging different positions when someone needs something or someone, you know, they're calling for storage or whether they're calling for actual positions. So like that was really helpful. Just kind of seeing what people are talking about and being connected in that community. I'm very big on just like, if it looks fun, I'm gonna apply. And I don't worry. I think a younger version of me was always constantly worried of like, I'm not qualified. But I think I like had to just like block that out of my head and just be like, just if it looks fun, I'm gonna apply and I'll figure it out later. It's up to them if they think I'm qualified or not, but it's not up to me. And so like, I think having that mentality, part of me was really scared to apply for This American Life. I was like, there's so many people who, you know, are deserving of something like this. And I was like, you know, didn't have audio published anywhere. So it was definitely a scary feeling. It's so easy to be intimidated, especially now in this kind of field and with layoffs and everything just piling on top of each other. And so, yeah, I would say my biggest advice, if it looks fun, apply, figure out the rest later.
Really good advice. I think every sort of job that I applied for where I was a successful candidate, I like really made sure to know what they made. I applied to shows that I like was a fan of in a lot of cases, and like really made sure to show that I knew them and I could just kind of like go into it and work in that team as if I was already there. And I think in some way, like when I applied to QXR podcasts, I was less familiar with their work, but I like listened to their entire series of podcasts that like existed out there, and actually like
so
really
great.
liked them.
That's such great advice, and you'd be so surprised at how many people don't do that. It's like something very simple that you can do that's like puts you in a great position.
And then you get to like talk about what you really like about what they make, and then they're like, "Oh, you like us," and then I think that like gets you an interview at least, and then you can talk a little bit more about how great you are or like what skills you have. So that's been helpful for me.
That's great. So we're going to take some questions. I think if you guys have questions, start to think of what your questions for these panelists are. And I would like to ask the panelists what they're listening to outside of work. Is there anything that you're listening to that you found inspiring, interesting, exciting, or even just entertaining?
I mean, I was listening to this show, Bot Love, which is by, it's another show in the company that we're part of, Radiotopia, and it's about people who fall in love with these AI, like chatbots. It's kind of, I'm trying to think of what to compare it to. It's almost a little like those like TLC shows, like My Strange Addiction, but like actually with substance. And because it's real people with real lives, traumas, or just, you know, interesting ways of communicating that have fallen in love with these like chatbots that you can make on this website. Basically, you can kind of make your dream girlfriend, mom, dad, whatever. And it kind of follows these people's lives and their relationships with these people. And it just talks a lot about how we think about relationships and also how, like, what methods of healing from trauma are safe versus not safe. People have very different views of that. Yeah, it's a super interesting show. It's kind of an example of like just a good idea, I think. Yeah, it's really cool.
Speaking of Radiotopia, and this is like a show that's like so different from everything else I listen to, that like normally I like very like deeply produced narrated shows, but then I like somehow stumbled upon Normal Gossip, and I kind of love it. It's like there's something about the show that like really works, and I'm trying to figure out what it is.
I feel so bad. I feel like I haven't listened. Since I started this job, I feel like I haven't really listened to anything but the work that I have to do at the job.
That's real. I mean,
I'm like thinking really hard. I'm like, what's the last thing I listened to? I'm like, I feel so bad. I don't even know.
Fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a common complaint in the audio industry where it's like you spend all day listening to things, and it becomes hard. I remember talking to someone who had gone to culinary school and then started working in a restaurant and was like, oh no, I've ruined the thing I love most. You know? So it's hard to carve out that time to listen to other things, and not necessarily even desirable.
What are you listening to, Ellen?
So let's see. Most recently, I listened to the Girlfriends. That I've been, the heavyweights now out from behind the paywall. I've always loved heavyweight. Was listening to a bunch of heavyweight episodes today. And Rumble Strip, the Taylor Swift episode today, really good. Any questions? Andres. We have a mic. We're bringing a mic to you.
Okay. What kind of people should we be following on Twitter and LinkedIn? Like, what kind of editors? Like, what kind of keywords should we search? Because like that's kind of where I'm like getting lost in my process for looking for an internship.
So I kind of follow based on, I follow when you go to like different shows that you like, I usually will go to their website and go to like the masthead page or the about page, and sometimes it'll say their handle, other times it'll just say their name, and I'll Google. I mean, for The Pulse, which is where I first started pitching for like really short stories, the woman's name is Lindsay Lazarski, and like the @ is just WHYY The Pulse, if you just want me to give you the specifics. But yeah, I think when I first started, I followed WNYC, I followed obviously NPR, I followed editors of shows I liked, and then to look for pitches, I would like put in quotation marks like call for pitches. Like that's usually how people will do the header. Or I'll do like quote unquote looking for stories. Or if I wanted to get more specific, if there's like, I know there's a holiday coming up and maybe I have a story for that, I'll like just put in like call for pitches and like quote unquote Halloween, see what comes up. Trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah.
So there's the New York Radio List.
There's also that,
which
yeah.
is a Google group, which, Sarah, do you remember what it is? It's like NYC Public Radio at gmail.com, I think. Google Groups.
Yeah, and any of your professors here can add you to the list.
Anybody
and you will
can.
get 50 emails a day.
Yeah, it's a
Or a
lot.
digest.
I put it
Or
on
a digest.
I put it on digest
Yeah.
personally.
It's a lot,
lot of
but it's
gossip.
definitely worth it. It's how I found The Pulse for sure. And it's how the Radio Diaries job came up. If not for her, like it definitely helps. So it's annoying, but it's something that I would definitely keep track of if I was just graduating.
And then the other thing is the Association of Independents in Radio. It's absolutely worth a membership in the associate. And part of why it's worth a membership is because they have freelancer rates. And so you can look up freelancer rates. So like when somebody hires you for a job, you can figure out what a fair rate is when they say, what's your rate? And you can go to AIR and just check that that's actually what market rate is before you get taken advantage of or not get taken advantage of.
I think you get a pretty good discount as a student.
Richard.
I'm sorry if the panelist has already addressed this. I was sort of...
Yeah, jump on in. This is Professor
I was here
Richard
before,
Yeh.
but I wonder if any one of you can talk about whether you have any experience pitching a organization for the first time. They've never worked with you before. They don't know what you're about. They've never heard your pieces. I believe one of the hardest hurdle is to get that first freelance piece, especially with audio, as we all know. Those of us who do this work, there's a rather high barrier to entry. So I wonder if any one of you can talk about your experience pitching a team for the first time. How do you get there? How do you get them to even see your email? And how do you get them to know that you're good for it?
I can take this one because I have a recent example. I was able to pitch the story that I worked on for my lit rep thesis for a podcast, and I think a lot of like things came together in the sense that it was actually Sarah Kramer back there who told me about the show Proof in the first place, and then they were looking for pitches through Air Media at the time, and I think an advantage at the time was also that I was already sort of into the reporting process and I had a good idea of what the story was going to be. And I think I listened to a bunch of their episodes and kind of made it so that it could potentially be a story for them. I was lucky enough to like still be here and get my peers to look at it, get Sarah to look at it, and get a few folks' idea and feedback before I sent it off to their editor. And then from there on, it was like a conversation. They got back to me like a while afterwards, and then we like hopped on a call between myself, the editor, and the host, and they kind of wanted to get an idea of how I wanted to do the story and how they might kind of work with me, and then it was greenlit, and then I got to work with them. So that was a cool experience.
Just to follow up, did you have something to show them? Like to show them that this is what you know in terms of, this is what you know in terms of reporting, gathering tape, and writing. This is how you approach audio.
That's a good question. I think I like let them know that I was working on the story as part of my like thesis at NYU Journalism. I don't think I sent them any previous clips. I think I like gave them in my pitch a sense of like who my characters were going to be, who like what I think the story arc was going to be, and that I think got their interest. Yeah, I don't think I like sent them anything I had previously worked on necessarily.
I can add to that. Yeah, I think my first story was for the health podcast, The Pulse, and it was at a time where I think it was September 2020. So I'd been interning at WNYC, but I'd never like really produced anything of my own. Like I was kind of just doing like radio work. But yeah, I'd found out there was a call for pitches on the New York Radio listserv, and I think on Twitter. I had just been Googling calls for pitches like a lot. And I think a big help when you're putting out your first pitch is to respond fast. So I think as soon as I like saw the email, it was for a story, an episode about hair. They kind of do different science-y episodes about different topics. And I think a big thing with your first pitches, I found a lot of success in doing personal stuff, which I know is not everyone's deal, but not, giving out people's personal information about my life and stuff like that, but just stuff that has to do with me. So I think I had pitched a story that was about like my journey accepting my natural hair, something where I knew I am one of the voices and I can easily do that, and something where I can just interview like a hair scientist, like a trichologist or something. Like, I think something that's really helpful for your first pitches are things that you can manage, and not over-promising people like, I'm going to interview this very complicated person, which is something that was helpful with The Pulse, which is that it was science-y. I could just interview an expert, which is something you guys have definitely done here before. So it was definitely first responding fast, and then secondly, I put my pitch title in all caps to make sure they see. I was just like, pitch, black girl's hair, just like get that in there. And then, yeah, I think what also helps is just grabbing them with the first line. I think it's like basic writing stuff, starting off with something like, I hated my hair as a kid as an African-American woman who's also gay. Something just interesting. And I think for clips, I didn't have anything published, so I just sent them SoundCloud links of what I did at school. I think people really kind of put pressure on you to have something published as your clip, and I think in audio, people really just value, like, can she edit something? And whether it's on SoundCloud, it's on YouTube, it's just somewhere. I would definitely, try that, and just kind of mining your personal life. If you feel like you don't have any ideas, you probably do. I think that was definitely helpful.
So a similar question. Now that you're on the other side, and I'm assuming you're being pitched, so I wonder if you could talk to us about, like, walk us through if you've been pitched and like why you took it and then how you got them from A to B, and also like now that when you're like I've been on this, I've pitched and I've also been pitched, so like when I was being pitched, I was like, oh yeah, that's what I was doing wrong before. So is there anything that you're learning now that you're on the other side?
So I'm imagining at Radio Diaries, you guys don't take a lot of pitches from the outside.
We don't take a lot because we do a lot of the work, but there was one that we were gonna take, but the person I think died, so we couldn't do it. I mean, we do history stories; people die, like.
Yeah.
But the reason it was accepted was because I think something that I kind of knew in school, but like I always thought I was talking too much in pitches. I feel like I always thought if I knew more, that's too much information, I should just tease them. I think on the other side of things, people really value that you know this person that you're either going to interview, or you know the subject, or if you have a personal connection. The pitch was of a woman whose grandmother was like one of the last survivors of this big World War II like crash, basically. They obviously died, but it was good because she clearly, like, she'd researched it. Like, it was obvious that she had talked to this person, she researched the topic, and I think she had, like, a date peg, like it was gonna be the anniversary. So I think those three things, especially for your first pitch, anniversaries are so great. Even if it's not for a history story, if it's just like the subject matter has something to do with Christmas, you know, or something to do with Mother's Day, a time peg will always, I feel like, get somebody's eye, because a lot of people in podcasts are looking for filler things for those days. So yeah, I would say like knowing your subject, knowing the topic, and then like really paying attention to when it would come out, like basically serving it to them on a platter would really help.
Michelle, did you get to see at This American Life and at Serial evaluating pitches from the outside?
Yeah, I got to see when pitches would come in, and it was cool because I also got to hear, you know, what the editors were talking about in terms of those pitches. And I think, I mean, something that was already said is like making sure you kind of give them an idea of like why should you be reporting this story? What would you bring? What perspective do you have? And I think definitely, similarly, like to my pitches, I would personally never really add my work, but I would make sure to give them, because like a pitch is very technical, right? It's like who, what, the character, like who you're gonna talk to, why should you even care? Why should I be talking about this in the first place? But I think always kind of giving them a sample of my writing and my voice in the pitch somewhere, where if it's like a specific detail that I wanted to talk about or something, just to show them this is the way it's the style of it, or how it would be written. And I think people really appreciate style in a pitch sometimes. And so I think that is something that I think at This American Life, they would talk a lot about, is like, why would this person be the one that we're gonna go to? Is there someone else out there that can talk about something similarly, but maybe better, because their perspective or their lived experience can talk to that more?
Would that happen, that a pitch would come in from somebody and they would be like, this is great, but we're gonna give it to someone else?
It was never like, we're gonna give it to someone else, but it's just like, maybe they thought the person, it's like if you're talking about a specific group of people or a specific history or a specific story, but there's really not a connection between like, especially if it's personal, but there's kind of like a disconnect between the person who was gonna produce it or the person who's pitching it versus the story. Like that was kind of a thing when they're like, you know, this seems like there's some kind of disconnection or yeah, like maybe this story definitely does belong somewhere, but it should go to someone who has, you know, that insight, like I said, that lived experience, so they could really speak to the story or like what the parts of the story that are important to get to. And so that's something that I think, like highlighting that, like your connection to it. What are you bringing by producing this or by interviewing them?
Thank you. I feel like you all have mentioned kind of your own unique voice, your own unique take on things, and kind of what you like to produce. Can you just speak a little bit more to how you found that and how you kind of have narrowed yourself down or found what you like to focus on?
I would say grad school. This is like where I was able to really just like figure out what I like to talk about and what I didn't. There were certain projects that like after I did them, I was like, yeah, I don't want to do nothing like that ever again, really. And then there was things that I did. There was a piece that I worked on in a personal essay class here at NYU. And it was just like it was like for a random assignment exercise. And I talked about when I was like 13 going to like a Catholic church retreat. And I was like, it was also my first time trying to be funny, which was like really hard and kind of like embarrassing because I was like, I'm trying to be funny. I don't know if it's gonna land. But like I was able to kind of like, I wouldn't have like put out the idea on paper if I wasn't given that random assignment. And I think after that, the story kind of stuck with me. And I was like, you know, I want to do something more than this. And so I think eventually I was able to kind of figure out the types of stories. Like that, for example, I realized in grad school, I used to hate writing about myself. And I realized here when I started doing it, I was like, oh, actually, it's kind of fun, even though it's kind of personal and embarrassing sometimes. And so, yeah, that's, I think being here and like just trying different things is like how I was able to figure out what I like and what I don't like, or what I feel like I'm good at and what I feel like there's other people that should be doing those stories, not me.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the more I think about it, I was also kind of like, I remember a time when I was sort of stressing out about like, what's my voice? How do I find it? And I know it's important, but I also don't know if there's like a magical moment where you find your voice. I think the more you do it, the more you become like comfortable in your voice, I think. And I think the other thing I would say is just like listening to a lot of other people's work and kind of finding what you enjoy listening to. And like you don't have to make the thing that somebody else makes, but that gives you an idea of like what something could be. And I found that helpful.
Yeah, I think even like outside of like audio and radio and stuff, I was just kind of pay attention a lot more to like what TV shows am I veering towards? What documentaries do I like to watch? Like what movies and what subject matter do those have? And I think I would realize that a lot of the time I really like things where it was either kind of memoir or someone's like personal history, just something a little more pertaining to like the arts and culture kind of side of things versus like a lot of like sciencey things. So yeah, I think it's also just minding your personal life, like minding who you follow, like just what subject matters kind of catch your eye. I feel like that's really how you'll find like the kind of stories that you like to do.
Hi. I'm wondering if you have any tips on finding recruiters or connections to send your resume to, because I feel like when you're looking for your first job, a lot of times if you just fill out an application, like it might not even be looked at by a human. So did you, when you were looking for your first job, how did you find that connection, or how did you get someone to look at your resume?
I think that's where I liked the listserv better than LinkedIn or the listserv even and Twitter. Just a job that's posted by someone with an actual email to me would bring me a lot more confidence. I think Indeed did not do me very good. Like there are jobs I've applied for on that thing that still, I don't even know if they got it. So I would definitely, yeah, if it's somebody's email, even if it's posted on their website and they say, you know, apply here, maybe follow that, you know, and not to confuse them and go behind their back in their email. But if they posted it somewhere like Twitter and they give their email, or they posted somewhere like the listserv, those I think are more likely to be fruitful than like Google listings and those kinds of things.
I don't have a very wise thing to say about like connecting with recruiters necessarily, but I think I've always just tried to figure out who the role reports to and either make that really clear when like in a cover letter, or like send them a note, an email, and just say like, hey, I applied to this job, whatever. And that's, I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, just, I mean, to further, so often you're applying through like a job site or something where your application goes to a database, and so
Yeah.
sending that email, giving the heads up of like I applied,
Yeah. So at
is
least they
telling the
know,
hiring
yeah.
manager to go pull your resume if you're, you know, if you can get their attention. It's interesting, recruiters, I'm not sure are the best path to, certainly from our limited sample here. Fellowships, internships is a much more successful way to get your foot in the door. And, certainly from the hirings, I've hired lots and lots of people. It's hard to hire somebody from a resume that you've never met before and you don't know. It's scary, you're like, oh, we only have one position to hire, and it's very precious. And if you have interns or people you've worked with before or freelancers you've worked with, it's much more of a known quantity, right? So even that freelancing, I've hired people who have tried to freelance for me and pitched over and over again that I've turned down over and over and then hired for a job. So even just pitching is like a great thing to do to build a relationship with somebody. Any more questions? Okay.
Hi, yes. I have a question. So I think based off of what you said, it sounds like the three of you all weren't super audio focused when you came into grad school, had maybe more of a writing background. I'm curious how you made the decision to kind of switch from writing, written journalism to audio, and also like where you're at now. Do you feel like you're fully, like both feet are in the audio door? Are you like ever still thinking, you'd go back to written? This coming from somebody who, like, I'm doing my first audio class this semester. It's really cool. I love it. But not sure, like, what the path would be, whether I have to choose one or the other, or is there like space to kind of stay in both?
Yeah, I don't think I like consciously made the choice of like, oh, I'm going to change, because I came in doing like long form nonfiction writing, and I didn't like make the conscious choice of like, okay, now I'm switching to audio completely. It was kind of like a thing where it's like, I'm looking for a job, this looks cool, this looks fun, and I got in, like, I got my foot in the door, and it just felt like, it was just kind of felt like a natural flow to keep going. Especially when you're like building your skill set, and especially right out of college, it feels nice when you're in this pace. And I didn't want to, I was enjoying it, and so like that also kind of just pushed me to keep going and applying for similar jobs. I also just felt like I had this momentum that I kind of didn't want to lose. And so in my mind, like I still love to write long form, and it's something that I could definitely see myself going back to whenever I would like. And audio still also lends itself to scripting a lot. So it's like I still have that. I still get to use writing all the time in audio. So I feel like I didn't really abandon it. But yeah, I'm always open to going back to just writing if that ever happens. But yeah, I just felt like it was like a momentum thing. And I felt like I was getting better and I felt good about it. And so I just wanted to keep going.
Yeah, I think when I was here, kind of as I said, I like really wanted to do more audio, so I was really happy to kind of find that like that is something that I enjoyed. I don't know if you have to choose between one or the other. I think especially while here you can definitely pursue both. And I think in my current role I do more sort of writing in like at WQXR right now, and that these things sometimes kind of go side by side, I think, and I think there are just kind of a lot of different combinations of jobs, and even like, producers that I know will like be doing other writing projects on the side and whatnot, so yeah.
Yeah, I think you can definitely do both. Well, I came in definitely doing a hard pivot from writing to audio, and I think what made me choose audio was, well, there was just a lot of momentum around audio, which I think there still is, even as scared as people are. There's just so much momentum around making things that I feel like people feel in writing, but I did feel like it was stronger in audio. And I think in terms of like thinking of it as which one's going to be, your day job versus your side hustle, not for nothing, I do think audio is very immersive and time consuming in a way that written work to me, like it didn't feel as much. Like it did feel like with audio, it's intensive, you're going out and recording in the field, and you do the same thing with writing, but depending on the kind of writing you do, I was doing fashion writing here and there. A lot of those I think were more manageable to do as a freelance position, whereas with audio, I found it really hard to like manage it sometimes as like just a side thing. Like it's very consuming of your time. So I think in doing, if you want to choose which one to make your like main thing, you almost have to choose between like what would you rather devote more time of the day to, or which one would produce the better result. I think to me, I think devoting a lot of my time to audio, but it's not as much as to writing, I think I'd still be able to produce a good result with writing, but I didn't feel the same way vice versa. Felt like if I did writing all the time and I just did audio on the side, it wouldn't be very good. So yeah, I would say that's a big factor.
Any more questions? One more. Oh, two more.
For those of you that have a personal practice of like writing or making work, how do you juggle your personal practice with your professional practice?
Great question. So yeah, I do writing on the side for sure. Love it, will never stop. And I think you have to figure out what time of day is better for you. I wake up pretty early, and eventually I had to realize that night writing was just not working. You know, your brain is kind of dead. People don't really, something that I feel like I didn't really anticipate that much in grad school is that your creative battery, it can run out. Like, audio is beautiful because you can be creative. It's also hard because you're putting in a lot of creative energy every day. So I think if you're doing stuff on the side, especially stuff that's creative, I personally would recommend doing it in the morning. Because depending on where you work, there is a chance people in your audio job can bother you at night. Doesn't happen to everyone, but it can. And yeah, I think you kind of have to almost like set hours. Like I set, before I go on my commute, like an hour, 2 hours to just like look at where I want all my writing projects to be, like start thinking about like what other places I can pitch and that kind of thing. And yeah, you just kind of have to make it a routine, and like you'll see results.
I wish I was more like you. I feel like I'm really bad at routine, and I'll tell myself like, okay, you're gonna write for fun at this time, and then I'm like, I don't want to do it because I'm tired, and so I just kind of go off like when I just feel like it. It also took off a lot of pressure, because I think when I was on this schedule of like I have to write this many pages or this many words around, like I'm constantly on a production schedule at work, so I'm like, let me not put myself on a production schedule for fun when I'm like writing for fun. And so in order for me to kind of keep it still really enjoyable, I just kind of go off like, if I feel like I've made a habit of like having a notebook by my bed. I have a notebook by my desk. I am constantly on like my notes app. And if I have an idea, a thought, even if it's just like a sentence or an idea, I like train myself to just like write it down. And I think kind of just go off that energy. I feel like I'll write more productively that way, instead of like telling myself I have to write at this time. But I think it works.
Each to their own, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard different things. Like a lot of people work on that. Like I'm gonna wake up at this time and write, which I think works for them. But yeah, personally, it's kind of just like whenever I feel like it.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting question. And like, before I came here, I was working in a very different field, and then I like found it a lot easier to spend time in the evening like writing, like doing my own project back then in some ways. I think when your like actual day job is also writing and producing, to come home and do a little bit more of it for you, I think can be harder. Not that, people do it and I like admire it and I try to do it too, but I think just kind of giving yourself a little bit of grace, and kind of as Mycah says, there's sometimes you feel a little bit depleted, and I think that's something to recognize in yourself as well.
Yeah, but pursue different things. I mean, I feel like when I got my first job, there was like kind of guilt with like having a side thing. Like sometimes you feel in your brain that like everyone is devoting everything to this job, and then you go online and they have 4 other jobs. Like you set your boundaries, like put in your out times for the doctor or whatever, because like if you want to be, a lot of creatives have different things going for them. That's kind of how they keep going, but you won't get to that point unless you establish like, okay, I actually really do need to be out at 7:30 because I have other creative pursuits. Like, yeah.
Okay, last question. I know you have a question.
I was just gonna ask, kind of similar to like the Twitter thing, like wanting to do that but not knowing how. I feel like with networking, I do want to keep in touch with like professors I meet or like industry contacts, but I feel like I just don't really know what to say. Like I don't want to bother them, but I do know that it's important, so I just don't know if you have any tips for that.
I've given up on Twitter. Like, I can't do social media. I have an account and I follow people I like admire or whatever, but that's about it. But I think with people that I do want to connect, I don't know, read their work, listen to their work, and say something that I really liked about them. And then often I find, especially in this industry, people are even like very accomplished, very busy people are kind of flattered to hear from you. And when you want to like get coffee or do a call and hear about their work and ask for advice, I've gotten good sort of responses, and people kind of do seem to have a sense of community and care for one another, and especially folks that are kind of starting out in the industry. So kind of having more and more of those experiences have helped me kind of get in touch with someone new. And also like there's folks like Ellen who like everyone in this industry seems to know, and I do a name drop all the time.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think I'm someone who's like, I was never like a networker. Like I don't like the vibe of it really, but I think something that I've trained myself to do is definitely, like you said, like listening to people's work and like having questions for them. Like, what do you really want to know? Whether it's like specific to like a series they did or an episode or like on their career path. I think having questions, and yeah, people are definitely flattered to hear that one, people are out there listening to their stuff and you enjoyed it enough to like hit them up. And then also to kind of have that kind of open discussion of their work and, from a place where you want to learn. And so I think people are really receive that really well. And yeah, I too was pretty surprised by how open and honest and how willing people are to help.
Yeah, I agree with both of those things. I think a quick email, it feels awkward at first, but I think people do respond. People definitely respond. And I think they respond well because yeah, people tell people in person, I think, when they like their work, but it's not often people like will just blatantly reach out of nowhere. So it's just a very simple way to just keep on their radar. And yeah, not for nothing, I think the coffee date is a great example, especially when you're in this phase where it's like, I'm graduating, I'm like, just trying to learn more about the industry, just trying to learn more about your career. It's like 20 minutes or whatever of your life. Chances are they'll say yes, and it's just a good way to get on their radar, especially if it's somewhere that you like or can see yourself working. So I would do one of those two things.
All right, so my advice is to network with your colleagues because, it wasn't that long ago that these three were here in one of these seats, and now they're employed, gainfully employed, and might be recommending the next hire at their place of business.
We're hiring an intern, by the way.
You're looking for an intern right now? Yeah, so with that, let's adjourn to have some drinks and meet your colleagues. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you all coming back.